these attributes have always belonged to God and shall always belong to God. He does not pick up attributes along the way. He does not discard other attributes within time or eternity. He is forever the same. And this is a sense of His immutability. This is important for us to know, because sometimes people make an unwarranted distinction between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, as if these are two different gods, or somehow they have changed hats or assumed a different personage. No, the God of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament, is the God of eternity past, the God of eternity future. He never changes. And all of His attributes are eternally permanent within God. That is a very important distinction for us to understand. The third thing that I would tell you at this point is that all of these attributes are inseparably interconnected. In other words, no one divine attribute can be separated from any other attribute. Each attribute is a part of the whole that comprises the being and the essence of God. For example, the holiness of God. That defines every other attribute. God's love is holy love. God's judgments are holy judgments. God's truth is holy truth. God's wisdom is holy wisdom. Each attribute is inseparably connected with all of the other attributes. As we think about the attributes of God, it's not as though each attribute is a part of God. Like a slice of a pie, and this is a part of God. Well, here's another part of God, and sometimes we end up playing one part of God against another part of God. No, that's not the way that these work. They're woven together like a perfect tapestry. Each attribute works in perfect unity with every other attribute. They are never conflicting with each other, but they are all pulling in the same direction. Our mentor and teacher, R.C. Sproul, describes it this way. This is one way to affirm what is called the simplicity of God. God is a simple being rather than a complex being who can be divided into parts. A human being is a complex being with a head, ears, eyes, nose, arms, feet, various organs. When we seek to understand God, we tend to project our human complexity onto His being. We list His attributes: immutability, eternality, omniscience, omnipresence, holiness. We sometimes tend to think of God, Dr. Sproul writes, is made up of one part holiness and one part immutability and one part omnipotence. But all of God is all of His attributes in their entirety. God's holiness is immutable. God's holiness is omnipotent. God's holiness is eternal. In like manner, His immutability, omniscience, and eternality are defined also by His holiness. He then concludes, every attribute we ascribe to God applies to the whole of God. His attributes all exist mutually in a kind of reciprocality of attributes. That's very important for us to understand. So, as we begin this study on the attributes of God, let me conclude by asking you this question: why are these so important? Well, if we are to truly know God, if we are to grow in the knowledge of God, if we are to deepen in the knowledge of God, then we must have an accurate and clear understanding of who God is. We cannot grow to know God if we have misrepresentations of who God is in our mind. The more accurate our understanding of what the Bible says regarding who God is, it will be only to that extent can we truly grow in an experiential knowledge of God within our hearts. In other words, our thinking must be correct in our heads in order for our hearts to enjoy and to worship the one true living God. As I've already said, an accurate knowledge of God, it will define our worship of God. High views of God will lead to high and exalted worship of God. It is our theology that determines our doxology. It is our understanding of the greatness of God that causes our hearts to rise up in great worship of God. And it is also our knowledge of God that defines how we live our Christian lives. If we are to live godly lives, then we must know what God is like if we are to live godly lives. Say, do you think understanding the holiness of God has any effect on your practical Christian living? Of course it does, because the Bible says, you shall be holy as I am holy. And I think ultimately it even defines our evangelism, that we don't have to resort to gimmicks and techniques and all the things that so many churches and Christians get into. No, we say to the nations, our God reigns. And we say to the world, behold your God. As we set forth the truth about who God is, our evangelism becomes powerful and effective. So this is our beginning in our study of the attributes of God, and I trust that God will greatly bless us as we plunge deeper into this all-important subject of God.